Okay, so it sounds like you're really interested in finding some, well, new ways of thinking about how to manage change in organizations,
Yeah, that's pretty much it.
especially the complex ones.
Yeah,
Like the kinds we see now with all these networks of networks.
yeah.
We've definitely come to the right place because on this deep dive, we're going to dig into some really influential ideas about how change actually works.
For this deep dive, we're looking at a paper by Dr. Reds Butterfield. He's spent a lot of time trying to understand how organizations deal with change. This paper is like one piece of that bigger puzzle he's been working on.
Okay.
He has this idea that if we look at historical patterns of social change, how things have changed in the past, we can get some clues about how to manage change in organizations today.
Hmm. That's a, that's a really interesting perspective, like using the past to help us figure out the future.
Exactly. And to do this, Butterfield uses the work of three thinkers whose ideas are maybe not like super well known, but are really relevant to what we're talking about. Joseph Schumpeter, Carlota Perez, and then Neil Howe and William Strauss. It's a duo.
Okay, I'm definitely intrigued now.
Yeah.
So tell me a bit more about these thinkers and how their ideas can help us understand what's going on with organizational change.
Okay, so first up, we've got Joseph Schumpeter. He's probably best known for this idea of creative destruction.
Oh yeah, I've heard of that.
So it basically says that innovation, coming up with new things, it's always a process where the old stuff gets replaced by the new. Like it's a bit like a forest fire. It might seem destructive at first, but it actually clears the way for new growth.
Okay, so it's kind of like saying that disruption is a necessary part of progress.
Yeah, exactly. Now, Carlota Perez, she takes this idea and she kind of maps it out, right? She talks about these 50 to 60-year cycles of a technological revolution. She calls them technological surges. She argues that each of these surges, they're driven by a bunch of new technologies, and they totally reshape societies and economies. It's like a big wave that comes and changes everything.
So it's not just like random change happening. There are these patterns we can actually see.
Yeah, exactly. And finally, Neil Howe and William Strauss, they bring in the human element to this whole thing. People,
Okay.
they have this theory of generational cycles. They say each generation, they all have their own values, experiences, even their own way of seeing the world.
That makes sense.
And that shapes how they deal with change, how they respond to it.
Yeah, you can definitely see how different generations might have very different ways of dealing with change.
Absolutely. And what's really cool is that all three of these frameworks, like creative destruction, technological surges, and these generational cycles, they all kind of connect, they work together to explain not just big social change, but also the challenges that organizations are dealing with today, like right now.
I'm starting to see how all this fits together. So Butterfield is saying that if we understand these patterns from history, then we can, get better at managing change in our own organizations.
Exactly. And to show this, he uses a really interesting example. It's a case study about a car company. They're called Auto Legacy Inc. So they were this huge company that basically built its empire on gas-guzzling trucks and SUVs.
Ah, the kind that used to rule the roads.
Exactly. But by 2025, they were in deep trouble. You had all these electric vehicle startups popping up everywhere. Climate activists are protesting outside their factories. And they were just stuck in their old ways, They couldn't seem to change.
It sounds like they were facing, a perfect storm of change.
Oh, they totally were. And Butterfield uses those three frameworks, Schumpeter, Perez, and Strauss and Howe, to look at what went wrong, like why they were struggling so much, but also what they could have done differently, how could they have handled it better?
Okay, so break it down for me. How did these frameworks actually help to understand, what Auto Legacy was going through?
All right. So let's start with Schumpeter's creative destruction idea. Remember that one?
Yeah.
Okay, so Auto Legacy, they were hanging on for dear life to their old technology, the internal combustion engine.
The gas guzzler.
Yeah, while the world was moving towards electric, their whole business, their supply chains, everything was built around this old way of doing things.
So they were basically missing out on all the creative destruction that was happening all around them.
Exactly. And you could say they were also stuck in what Perez calls the maturity phase of a technological surge. Like that initial wave of innovation had passed them by, and they were just kind of stuck in a rut.
Right, they were looking backward instead of preparing for what was coming next.
Exactly. And to make things even worse, you had the generational thing that Strauss and Howe talk about. You had the boomer executives at Auto Legacy who hated change, the Gen X middle managers who were kind of stuck in the middle, and then the millennial engineers who wanted to innovate. And then you even had the Gen Z interns calling them out on social media for not being green enough.
Wow. It sounds like a total clash of like values and just different ways of seeing the world.
It was, and all these different factors, they combined to create this situation where auto legacy was completely out of touch with the world around them.
It's like a classic story of a company failing to adapt, you know?
It totally is. And it shows how important it is to understand these frameworks, these ideas, if you want to manage change well.
Okay, so I'm seeing how these ideas can be really helpful, but I'm curious, did auto legacy, did they manage to turn things around?
And that's where things get really interesting. They actually did pull off a pretty amazing transformation.
Really?
Yeah. And it all started with their new CEO, a Gen Xer named Clara.
Okay, I'm all ears.
Yeah.
Tell me about Clara and how she turned things around.
So Clara came in and, she saw that things had to change. She knew auto legacy needed a whole new way of thinking, like a total overhaul of their business.
A complete reboot.
Yeah. She realized to survive, they had to embrace electric vehicles, figure out how to navigate that green surge Perez talks about, and find a way to use the strengths of, all the different generations in the company.
So she was taking a holistic approach. She was looking at everything, not just one thing.
Exactly. And it was all based on those 3 frameworks we've been talking about.
Okay, so how did she put all these ideas into action? This is where it gets exciting, right?
Absolutely. So let's dive into the details of how Clara transformed auto legacy.
I am ready to be inspired.
So we left off with auto legacy. They were right on the edge of this huge transformation, and their new CEO, Clara, was leading the charge. And you said she was using those 3 frameworks as her guiding principles: Schumpeter, Perez, and Strauss-Howe.
Yeah, exactly. It was like her playbook for change.
Right. Okay, so let's unpack that a little bit. What did that actually look like in practice? How did she actually use those ideas?
Yeah, I'm really curious about that.
So Claire's first move, it was pretty bold. She knew that to survive, auto legacy had to go all in on the electric future. And that meant phasing out their old gas-guzzling lines, the ones that made them famous.
Yeah.
And shifting all their research and development, everything towards EVs and battery tech. They even sold some of their old factories to EV startups just to free up resources for this massive shift. It was huge.
Wow, that's some serious creative destruction right there. She wasn't afraid to just dismantle the old stuff to make way for the new. But I bet she got some pushback on that, right?
Oh, absolutely. Remember those boomer executives we talked about?
Yeah.
They were super attached to the old ways of doing things, That was a big challenge for Clara.
Yeah, so how did she deal with that? How did she get those different generations on the same page?
Well, she realized that she couldn't just force her vision on everyone. She had to bring those boomers along, get them on board with the changes. So she focused on reframing how auto legacy saw itself. Instead of just being a car manufacturer, she started calling them a mobility solutions company.
Oh, I like that. It's like she was tapping into a different set of values.
Yeah.
Maybe appealing to their desire to leave a legacy of innovation or something.
Exactly. She helped them see that this wasn't about abandoning their legacy. It was about evolving it, taking it to the next level. And she also made sure to recognize their expertise in areas like government regulations and investor relations. She gave them important roles in those areas.
So she was using their strengths, but also guiding them towards the future.
Exactly. But she didn't stop there. She knew that to really succeed in this new world, auto legacy couldn't just do everything themselves,
Yeah.
They had to navigate that green surge that Perez talked about. And that meant working with other people, with partners.
So it wasn't just about internal change. It was about changing how they worked with the whole ecosystem, right?
Exactly. Clara saw that to build the infrastructure for electric vehicles, like charging stations and stuff, they needed to work with governments. She also knew that getting rid of combustion engines would have a big impact on workers, so she partnered with unions to create retraining programs.
That's smart. She was thinking about all the social and economic effects of the change, not just the technology itself.
Exactly. She understood that for this transformation to really work, it had to be sustainable on every level.
This is fascinating. So she was dealing with creative destruction, navigating the green surge. What about the other generations? How did she bring them into all of this?
Okay, so Clara, she realized that each generation had something unique to offer, and she created roles that would really use their strengths. So the Gen X managers, with all their experience and, they're kind of pragmatic, she put them in charge of bridging the gap between the old and the new on the factory floor.
Yeah, they're probably the ones who could actually make all the practical changes happen.
Exactly. Then you have the millennials with their tech skills and their love of collaboration. Clara put them in charge of developing open source projects, sharing Auto Legacy's EV patents with startups. The idea was to encourage innovation across the whole industry.
Wow, that's a huge shift from a traditional secretive company to like an open collaborative one.
Yeah, it was. And then finally, you've got Gen Z with their understanding of all things digital and what consumers want. Clara gave them a chance to pilot car as a service models in cities.
So basically every generation had a role to play in making this transformation happen.
Yeah, exactly. It's like she was a conductor leading an orchestra. She brought all these different instruments together to create this new sound, this new symphony.
I love that analogy. And did it work? Like what happened?
The results were amazing. Within 5 years, Auto Legacy went from almost collapsing to becoming a leader in this new era of mobility.
That's incredible. So what were some of the signs that they were succeeding? Like how could you tell it was working?
Well, their new line of electric vehicles, they called it EcoRide, it was a huge hit. Like, it totally dominated the mid-range market.
Wow.
And, whatever profits they were still making from their old gas guzzlers, they used that money to fund research into battery tech.
Smart. So they managed to be successful financially, but also like do good for the environment.
Exactly. And their partnerships with cities and unions, that helped them become a leader in the fight against climate change. They got this reputation as a responsible company that was thinking about the future.
That's awesome. What about internally, though? Like within the company itself?
Yeah.
Did their culture change at all?
That was probably the most impressive change of all. Those generational clashes that were like almost tearing the company apart, they just disappeared. They were replaced by this feeling of working together, like everyone had a shared purpose.
That's amazing. So what are the takeaways here? Like what can we learn from Clara's leadership, especially for people who are trying to deal with change in their own organizations?
Okay, so I think one of the big lessons is the importance of taking a holistic approach, like Clara did. She didn't just focus on the technology or the strategy. She looked at everything, the whole picture. She understood that to succeed, you need to embrace creative destruction, figure out how to ride those technological surges, and use the strengths of all the different generations you've got.
It's about seeing how all the pieces fit together.
Exactly. And it's about being flexible, willing to change direction if you need to. Change is rarely like a straight line. There will be setbacks, challenges, and times when you need to adjust your approach.
So being comfortable with not knowing everything, with like embracing the unknown.
Exactly. And finally, I think Clara's story shows how important leadership is, She had a vision and she inspired her team to achieve amazing things. But leadership isn't just about having a great idea. It's about making it happen, turning that vision into reality.
Walking the walk, not just talking the talk.
Absolutely. And it's about empowering other people to lead. Clara didn't try to do everything herself. She built a great team and gave them the freedom and support they needed to succeed.
So it's about creating a culture where everyone feels like they're part of something bigger, where everyone can be a leader in their own way.
Exactly. And that's one of the most powerful ways to navigate the storm of change.
I think we've covered a lot of ground here, but I want to make sure we tie all this back to Dr. Butterfield and his overall goal of understanding how organizations deal with change. Remember, this paper is just one part of that larger puzzle he's working on.
Right, exactly. And I think this case journey really shows how important it is to understand those historical patterns of change that Butterfield is so interested in. Those patterns can help us see what challenges are coming and come up with ways to deal with them effectively.
Like having a map for the future, even though the terrain might be, a bit bumpy.
Exactly. And those patterns can also help us understand all these different forces that are shaping the world right now, like technology, how generations think differently, even social and political movements.
It's about connecting the dots, seeing the big picture.
Precisely. And that's what makes exploring change so fascinating and so relevant to our lives. Whether you're running a huge organization or just trying to navigate your own life, understanding these patterns can help you make better decisions, build more adaptable organizations, and create a future that's better for everyone, now and in the future.
This has been so insightful. I'm starting to see change not as something scary, but as a chance to grow, to innovate, to really renew things.
System spirit.
But before we get too carried away, I think it's important to remember that change can also be really hard. It can be messy, challenging, even painful sometimes.
You're absolutely right. It's not always easy or fun. There will be pushback. There will be times when it feels like you're going backwards, and it can be exhausting.
So how do we deal with that? Like, how do we stay motivated and keep going when things get tough?
That's a great question. And it's something we're going to dig into in the last part of our deep dive. We'll talk about some specific strategies for, bouncing back from setbacks, for dealing with resistance to change, and for staying the course, even when it feels like the wind is blowing right in your face.
That sounds really valuable. I'm ready to hear about those strategies. But for now, I think it's time to wrap up this part of our deep dive and give our listeners some time to think about everything we've discussed.
Sounds good to me. Let's take a break and come back ready to tackle the final part of our journey through this storm of change.
So we're back and ready to finish our deep dive into this whole idea of navigating the storm of change.
Yeah, we've talked about some pretty powerful frameworks, for understanding change, like from these big historical patterns to the nitty-gritty of actually transforming an organization.
Right, and we saw how those frameworks can help us make sense of the challenges and the opportunities that change throws at us.
Yeah, but I think there's one more really crucial element we need to talk about if we really want to master this whole change thing.
Oh, okay. I'm all ears. What's the missing piece?
Resilience.
Ah, okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Change can be messy, right?
Uh,
Unpredictable. And sometimes it just plain hurts. You need to be resilient to get through all that.
exactly. And building resilience, it's not just about being tough or, just gritting your teeth and bearing it.
Right.
It's about developing these skills and strategies that can help you handle the emotional ups and downs of change.
So it's about having that inner strength to adapt and keep going when things are uncertain.
Absolutely. And I think this is where Dr. Butterfield's whole quest to understand change, it becomes even more important. He's not just interested in the mechanics of change, but also the human side of it, how it affects people.
Right. It's one thing to understand the theory, but it's totally different to actually live through it, right? To
Yeah.
deal with all the disruption, the uncertainty, the emotional roller coaster that comes with change.
Exactly. And that's why resilience is so key. It's about being able to bounce back from setbacks, to learn from your mistakes, and to keep moving forward, even when things are tough.
So how do we actually do that? How do we build resilience? Are there things we can do, specific strategies?
Definitely. One of the most important things is to develop a growth mindset. So that means seeing challenges as opportunities to learn and grow instead of, threats or failures.
Okay, so it's about changing how we think about those setbacks.
Exactly. Instead of getting stuck in negativity or self-doubt, we can ask ourselves, what can I learn from this? How can I use this experience to get better?
Yeah, that's a powerful shift in thinking. But honestly, it's easier said than done, right?
hmm
Sometimes when you're in the middle of a big change, it's hard to see the positive side of things.
Oh, absolutely. It's tough. And
Yeah.
that's why it's so important to have a good support network, people you can rely on.
Yeah.
Surround yourself with people who believe in you, who can encourage you, who can help you see the bigger picture when you're feeling lost.
Yeah, it's like having a team of cheerleaders to keep you going.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to ask for help. Sometimes we try to do everything ourselves, thinking we have to be strong and independent all the time. But the truth is, we all need help sometimes, especially when things are changing.
That's such an important point. It's okay to admit you need help.
It really is. And remember, building resilience is a journey. It's not like you just achieve it and you're done. It's a process of learning, growing, adapting.
Right.
There will be times when you feel strong and resilient, and times when you feel totally overwhelmed and exhausted.
It's like a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it gets. But even the strongest muscles need a break sometimes.
That's a great way to put it. And speaking of breaks, another really important part of resilience is self-care. Make sure you're taking care of yourself, physically, emotionally, mentally. Get enough sleep, eat healthy food, exercise, spend time in nature, connect with people you love. Do whatever helps you recharge.
Those are all great tips. It's easy to forget about self-care when you're busy with change, but it's so important for staying resilient.
It really is. And finally, remember, resilience isn't just about surviving change. It's about actually thriving in the middle of it. It's about using change as a chance to learn, to grow, to be creative, to create something new and meaningful.
Yeah, it's about turning those challenges into opportunities.
Exactly. And I think that's what Dr. Butterfield is really trying to do with his work. He wants to help us not just cope with change, but to embrace it and use it to make our lives and organizations better.
That's a great goal. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listener with one final thought.
Okay, what's that?
Change is going to happen. It's just part of life, part of working in organizations. But it doesn't have to be something we're afraid of. We can choose to embrace it, learn from it, and use it as a chance to grow and evolve.
I love that. And remember, you're not alone in this. We all face challenges and uncertainty. But by building resilience, developing that growth mindset and having a strong support system, we can navigate the storm of change and come out stronger on the other side.
That's a perfect way to put it. Thanks for joining me on this exploration of change.
It's been my pleasure.
And to our listener, remember, embrace the storm, dance with change, and create the future you want.
The future is yours.
Until next time, happy navigating.